I'm Sarah Ormany, and you are listening to the Audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator series.
We are so pleased to have Erin DeWard with us, who is a voice talent, a writer, an editor, and an actor, encompassing so many aspects of audio description and performance. Thanks so much for joining us, Erin.
It's my pleasure.
What do you love about audio description?
There are so many things, and I could talk about this for hours, and I'm not going to do that because we need to not be here for hours. But I think that the thing that I love the most when I'm writing audio description is finding the right words that are evocative and convey what I'm hoping the director was trying to convey, so that everyone can participate in media equally. Voicing audio description, I love that it's a modality of voice work that isn't acting and it isn't narrating. And I like to say to my students, it's like you're the piccolo in the symphony. You know, you're not separate from, you're definitely a part of, and you're providing an extra line of music that makes the piece have more depth and more beauty and more heart response. I don't know how else to say it.
It's really eloquent, and it's clear that you're also a writer because you found some really great words to convey that. One of the fascinating things, if we could go back to the writing and then go into the voice, is that there's been some misconceptions about people who are introduced to audio description that it is a transcript. Would you agree that it is more than a transcript? Is it more like an adaptation?
I would say it's neither of those things. It's helpful to have a transcript when you're writing, but you don't always get that. I just did a panel for the International Documentary Association on accessibility and audio description specifically. And her name is escaping me right now. Oh my goodness. From Sundance, who was moderating, she said it's like poetry. And I have to agree that it is like poetry. People have a tendency when they begin to write audio description to over describe. And we have to remember that people who are blind and people who have limited vision have been watching television and movies their whole life without audio description. So, and they live in our world where there are sounds that are recognizable. And so what I like to do if I have time, if I'm not writing an episodic, if I'm writing a movie, I like to watch it for the first time with my back turned towards the screen. And I like to take notes about what I don't know about what's happening. Like, what was that sound? I didn't recognize that sound. And then I go back and rewatch it and I fill in my blanks. And then I try and find the evocative words that concisely convey that plot pertinent thing. So it's not a transcript and it's not even an adaptation. It's its own art form.
Beautiful.
I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it sure does. And what a great word for poetry. Now let's pivot back to the voice. That as a piccolo in a symphony, it was very clear to me how you are sharing that there is a performance to this work. How are you different than a conversational AI person?
AI as in a conversational computerized voice.
Sure. For example, a synth created voice, a robot voice. Okay. Why choose you versus one of those robots?
Well, not just me. Any voice talent who does audio, who's familiar with the art form of audio description, because the piece, whatever the piece is, will have its own speed, its own vernacular, its own environment, its own general milieu feeling, whatever it is. So if you're describing, an opera, or if you're describing a dance piece, or if you're describing a work of art, or a sculpture in a park, or a television show, each of those things are going to be approached differently by the voice talent as well as the writer. But even more so, if you think of a movie like Young Frankenstein, And you compare that to a movie like, I don't know, Unforgiven, right? The pacing of the movie is different one from the other. The kinds of words that you're going to use are different than one another. The tonality of the voice is going to try and match the tonality of the art. So an AI may be able to sound more human now, and that will continue to, that kind of human sound will continue to increase, right, as they continue to work on it and make it a better product. But the thing about a human voice is it can convey a sense of environment and time and space and emotionality without acting, without stepping out of your piccolo part. You know, you're not going to take over the trumpet, but you can match your intensity to the entire symphony. And AI just can't do that and never will be able to do that.
How about some challenges that you found in audio description that you're really proud of how you overcame, if you can think of any specific examples?
Well, I think that when I first started, which was well over a decade ago, most people had never heard of audio description, and even blind people had not heard of audio description. And the first challenge was trying to figure out how to get trained, because there's no school to go to. So I stalked a gentleman by the name of Joel Snyder online on Facebook for a long time, actually, creepily for a long time. And I started responding to his posts and trying to build a little bit of a relationship with him. And then I finally asked him, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months in, I asked him, how do I get trained? And he said, well, I do these trainings, about twice a year. And I'm going to be doing one in New York in about 7 months. And I'm not the person who's making a decision about who's participating, but you can get in touch with Lawrence Carter Long, who's running the organization that's actually holding the training, and it's co-sponsored by the JCC in Manhattan. And so there were all these players, and somehow I managed to weasel my way into this training. And that was the beginning of a beautiful thing. I met Lawrence, who is, a huge advocate in the disabilities community, and has been a wonderful person to know, both as a friend and as a colleague. But I also trained alongside not just people who are interested in audio description, but people who came from the disabilities community in Manhattan who I didn't know. And working alongside them and getting to know them and having dinner and drinks after the training, and talking about how the sighted world makes assumptions about what blind people and people who have low vision need is so imperialist, I guess. I don't know. But it made me start to really think about all of this from a different perspective. It wasn't, the great white hope swinging in to save the poor blind people who couldn't act. It was a collaboration. That was the biggest thing. And I think one of the reasons that I love to train is because when I train, I don't come at it from that sort of savior standpoint. I come at it from talking to all the people that have been kind enough to speak with me over the years, who are people who are blind or people with low vision who utilize audio description. And that's made all the difference. I hope that made sense. It was sort of rambling.
It was absolutely clear. And that collaboration with the community seems like it's had a direct effect on your training that you give to others, as well as your own performances, whether it's the writing or the editing. Could I ask how audio description has affected your performance as an actor, or possibly how your acting performance has affected your audio description. Is there any connection or disconnection there?
It's a really, really interesting question, because in the beginning, I would have said the two were completely separate. As an audiobook narrator, I do first-person fiction, I do third-person fiction, I do nonfiction, I do memoir. Where I've found the connection between the two is in third-person fiction, because just in the same way that an audio describer who's voicing a project needs to find their place in the project, take the director's vision, communicate it through the warmth or the coldness or the speed or the slowness of their voice. In third person fiction, the narrator of the book, even if it's close as opposed to very removed narration, the actor still needs to channel the creator. The actor still needs to be able to find that author's voice and cadence and timing and let that flow through their body and come out their mouth. It isn't the audiobook narrator making decisions about how someone should hear the piece. It's hopefully the audiobook narrator channeling the author and bringing what the author had hoped to the piece. So I think those two things are very similar in terms of cadence and environment and creation.
That's great. And it's very clear from where you're speaking of this that you do bring intention to your work, regardless of the creative approach. That is, I guess back to the piccolo and the symphony, that it's all about story. And to get to that story, it's got to have intention.
Right. Agreed. And that's why AI is never going to write audio description, and AI is never going to successfully voice audio description or audiobooks.
Where would you love to see audio description headed if you could have your dream world?
In my dream world, when a filmmaker begins to storyboard out their film, they will think, I want this to be accessible to everyone. And I know that the piccolo really puts the icing on the cake in the symphony. So I'm going to storyboard in spots for audio description. I'm going to bring on board an audio describer, and we are going to collaborate in making my vision accessible and clear to anybody who wants to experience this work of art that I'm building. So I know that that isn't likely to happen, but I have been really, really, really lucky to maybe not collaborate from the very get-go and have audio description storyboarded in, but to work with filmmakers who were going into the post-production process, so that when I began to write, I could send a script and say, hey, what are your thoughts? And they could write back and say, I love what you've done, but I'd like to swap out this word for this word, because for me that feels more evocative. And then we can talk about it and work through it and come up with a script that is as much a part of the art as the art itself is.
And that kind of collaboration with a filmmaker seems to really join well with the collaboration with our community of blind and low vision audiences. That in a real sense that does connect.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like?
Just this is preaching to the choir, because these are people who already know about audio description, but I think there's still a huge number of people out there who say, why do blind people go to the movies? Why do blind people go to museums? And I think, coming from someone like me or someone like you who does it for a living has a little less weight than coming from someone who's an end user who can say why they go to the movies and why they watch television and why they go to the museum, why they go to the opera or the ballet or wherever it is that they want to go, and what they get from that experience. That is really what needs to be talked about, because I think that once creators understand that it isn't this teeny tiny little small population of people who, what do they get out of it anyway, but rather it's a huge group of people and a spectrum of people who get a lot out of their art and could get more out of their art if it were accessible.
Thanks for sharing that. Do you have a website where people could follow up with you?
Absolutely. It's www.erin, ERIN, DeWard, DEWARD, no space between the two words.com.
Thanks so much for joining us, Erin.
Thank you so much. I had a really pleasant time.